regional governments, and we are trying to take advantage of that. And fortunately, there's quite an exciting ecosystem of Canadian small, medium, and large-sized companies that are joining us on that ride. It's not all rosy. There are some challenges, but mostly I think we see at this point opportunities. And as we move forward, like I was mentioning at the beginning, we truly believe that in Southwest China, at the very least, raw potentiality has now morphed into true opportunity. We're well positioned as Canadians, given our resources there. There are fewer international companies chasing these actual opportunities than perhaps in other areas, and so we invite you to join the party and take advantage of us. The other thing I might mention in closing is the other side of trade, if you will, which is the investment side, and on that score, we're really seeing a lot more money that's flowing from our region into Canada. This is happening not only in traditional kind of areas such as resources, natural resources and real estate, but also in manufacturing and high tech and also clean tech. So that's quite exciting. For example, Bohong will be joining a ceremony here a bit later. They, a couple of years ago, invested $250 million to purchase a Canadian car manufacturing operation in Windsor. Until Fosun took a participation in the Cirque du Soleil, I think that was the largest Chinese investment in Canada outside of the resource sector. So it gives you an idea of how it's becoming more and more textured. And a new thing we're seeing as well is these regional funds. Sometimes they're provincially controlled, or sometimes they're SOE controlled, but they are sitting on hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of US dollars worth of capital that's being directed to go abroad, and sometimes they don't quite know how to do it. So for the lawyers and the accountants in the room, this is, I think, an extraordinary opportunity as well. Maybe I'll leave it at that. And David, shall we perhaps move on to give people a chance to ask a few questions, if possible? Alors, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, and welcome to the Southwest anytime.
Hi everyone, I'm David Perdue. I work with Philippe at the Consulate General of Canada in Chongqing. And like Philippe said, we'd be certainly happy to entertain any questions. Philippe is here, as is Dwayne, who works, Dwayne Robson, who is the Senior Trade Commissioner in Guangzhou. And like I said, I'm covering Southwest China as well. So any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
How much time do we have?
15 minutes. Thanks for the presentation. Dan Dubois from Guides.com. You mentioned a ton of gorgeous national parks. How big is that?
My take on that first. I think, well, in the area that we cover in Southwest China, especially in the deep west of Sichuan, where Philippe was mentioning, you have these 7,000 plus meter peaks. It's becoming more and more popular for foreigners, as well as middle class Chinese, to go out to those regions and do some adventure traveling. And a priority of the Chinese government is establishing national parks. And we, in fact, are working, the Canadian government is working with the Chinese government to put together some cooperative initiatives to help with the management of those parks. I think, to some extent, a lot of the provincial governments look at developing their tourism industries as a way to develop the local economy. And so they look to places and models like Zhoujiaigou, for example, they've been very successful in implementing sort of a mass tourism market where they get large numbers of tourists in that area and get them through and get them paying very quickly, and then they leave very quickly. So that's not exactly an adventure model of travel, but it's one that the local authorities seem to like to promote a lot of. But we are seeing that demand grow, especially, like I said, among the middle class. And I think there's a recognition from the local Chinese authorities that there's the demand for that for individual-based travelers to pursue more adventurous type options. So when you say that, are you referring to adventure travel in China or in Canada?
No, in China. So what I've been told is that China is like maybe 10 years behind Japan and Korea. But my assumption would either be somewhat of a shift away from just objects, but towards more experiences, like we've seen in Canada, but here in China. But yeah, just any feedback that you have.
I just might add that I'm talking to Destination Canada, which helps do the tourism relationship here. They have noticed that the shift for most of the travel is based here from group travel to individual travel, and finding out all the information on the internet or from individual travel sites. So in terms of promoting what you're looking at, they're thinking that they need to go out to individual travelers, so they're no longer doing these big events or the big processes as much as they were in the past. They're looking to individual travelers by having vignettes or different pieces to try to get them on. And talking to provinces like the province and others where they have a lot of richer people that are looking to do that, they're trying to open the access to areas where adventure travel would be popular, especially along the coast of those regions. They have some issues in terms of getting people there. For example, in terms of the float plane technology that's coming from Canada, it's not actually yet approved for use in this type of purpose yet in China. So there are still steps, as you're talking about in Japan and in other areas where they have access to the infrastructure to get people to adventure travel. Here, the difficulty is, so far, they're either going there by superhighway or by train. So it's not it's not the experience that they're looking for that they might get overseas. I think they're at the tip of the sort of the wedge here where the market is starting to come into place. They're asking for it. You get companies that are looking to partner and do that sort of operation. But it's still the individual ones, they're looking at it being a little bit easier to do overseas. I know that you wants to add something.
Not necessarily, but I think your answer gives it pretty much the broad orientation of things. I can maybe just add a couple of very quick anecdotes. I think it's on a continuum. Just like when you were saying, that a Chinese traveler abroad has been moving from tour group travel to individual travel. But actually, when you look at the kind of individual travel they're doing, it's sometimes kind of assisted individual travel. And when you look at what's going on inside China, it's a little bit of the same thing. They've gone from group travel to 7 or 8 people following each other in automobiles to kind of a fairly remote place, but not quite sure what to do at that point, right? So I mean, China has like stores like Decathlon. I don't know. It's kind of like a low-end mountain equipment co-op kind of place, right? Packed. Everybody's buying the most expensive gear they can. High-tech tents, Tibetan Himalayan survival gear, and then they drive their car to a mountain and then set up the tent next to the highway, right? And so, but it's a step in the right direction, right? So I think it's thin edge of the wedge, but also perhaps the right time to get into it. If I did it, I would probably consider packaging it in a way where there's kind of assisted adventure travel, right? Providing some support.
Yeah,
adventurous soul that's trying to get out there.
So I don't want to hoard everyone's time, but we're guides.com, so it's guided outdoor adventures led by locals and certified guides. Is there, I guess the other side of it is, since we are web-based, tech-based, what is the best way of going around trying to protect? I guess we don't necessarily have IP, but getting around our site being shut down and having something similar pop up.
Well, often people recommend that it's of crucial importance if you're setting up a web-based presence in China to do so physically in China in terms of locating that web-based presence on Chinese servers. Right. Simply because even if you're trying from inside China to access foreign websites, many of them are not blocked, but many of them are excruciatingly slow. So if you're trying to do business from a Canada-based server, it would not be uncommon for a Chinese tourist looking to book services with your company to wait 30, 40 seconds for a single page to load up, which is the unfortunate reality. So highly recommended to locate those servers in China, and of course it goes without saying, in Chinese.
Yeah. All right, thanks so much, you guys.
So Adam Kamanzuli, and I make solar hockey pucks for Africa. My question is, how do we compare to solar? So it's a solar lamp that's shaped like a hockey puck. So we manufactured actually in southern China and brought them to Tanzania. My question is, how do we rank versus other countries in our representation in this region and generally in China? So versus the US, the UK, the EU, how do we stack up?
My understanding is when we opened up our new trade offices, so counting those trades offices in terms of points of service, I think we rank up with Australia very well, more than the United States in terms of points of service for trade commission service. So we rank very highly. There are some other countries that have smaller non-official points that might be quasi-governmental, but when you're talking about governmental points of service, my understanding is with the new ranking, with our new sort of Canadian Commercial Corporation offices that we opened up, we're right here at the top. It doesn't mean we have the highest numbers. There are still numbers at other places, but in terms of points and where we are, if we had more resources, we could certainly help more and do more there. But we're trying to be efficient in how we're doing it and respond to what the public needs are.
Yeah, I think also it's worth noting. I mean, of course, if you look at the U.S. footprint, for example, it's huge, right? But I think it's fair to say that the Canadian Trade Commissioner service is unique in the sense that it, first of all of its services are free. They're very much geared towards actually supporting small and medium-sized companies. Of course, we do a lot of advocacy and troubleshooting for large companies, but anecdotally, at the very least, right, when I speak to some of my American friends, they're a little bit jealous of our system because their system is not as geared, it's not as encouraged to provide support and services to small and medium-sized companies. So I think we can always do better, but I think we're comparatively the same thing if we compare ourselves to Australia, where it's also sometimes you have to pay, right, to receive services. So I think we're in a pretty good space, and at least in a place like China, the fact that trade commissioners in China are also diplomats, right? We all have diplomatic status. It means that our ability as well to open doors in a place where the role of government and the role of the private sector are so intertwined is enhanced. And I think that's to everyone's advantage here.
I might add a caveat to that. For example, in Guangzhou, the trade team that I run there is 19 officers. 2 are Canadians that have diplomatic status. 17 are locally engaged staff in different places. So yes, the Canadians that are there have diplomatic status. Any other questions we can have?
I've got one more, actually. So you talked about us selling agricultural products to China in the last few years. What do you see us selling to China in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, the push is definitely towards services. In terms of if you're talking about where the growth is, 100% it should be services. We have more and more people coming in. We're trying to gain access to services. There's still going to be a tremendous appetite for the products that we have in Canada in terms of natural resources, food, and all the things. But there's a limit to that. In terms of, we don't have a very large portion of the market yet in the services economy because that middle class is growing here and starting to move up. So if you're looking for where we're going, sort of tourism, education, engineering services, architectural services, advertising, lighting, design, all of that, that's where we see the new sort of small and medium-sized enterprises coming in and getting access to the market. So there may be a different answer from Chongqing, but in the south we're certainly seeing services.
Maybe I'll just add that as a broad conceptual framework to understand what's happening. I thought what Rachel said a few minutes ago was a very good phrase, which is that we're moving from made in China to consumed in China, and we're finding that all of our biggest sectors of activity are all sectors right now that are targeted towards middle class income growth. So, I mean, I sometimes like to say that we're dealing with a two-track economy in our region as well as other regions in China, where you have that old, dirtier manufacturing, commodities-based heavy industry type of, that's the old China. The new China seems to be all, like where the growth is happening is services, and it's based on selling products to the middle class as well. So anything that's associated with that seems to be still doing quite well. So that's a framework to think of where growth is happening.
So we are a company from China, and we focus on introduce European and North America company to bring their brand and product to the China market. Introduce them the distributors from China different regions. So we want to know how we can get support from your organization and to expanding our service information to the Canada companies, which they have interest to get our service and support.
We'd certainly be interested in hearing about the information that you have that we can provide to Canadian companies. They're asking about where they can find people that can help them with distributorships, sort of logistics, information about areas that we can add to. We're a smaller team for all of us that are on the ground from Canada, so we rely on companies like yours as well to fill in those gaps and to provide added value services that don't come into the suite of services we have. So we'd certainly be interested in working with you and helping to let Canadian companies know by vetting your company and letting them know what specific services you have and what your added value could be. So I look forward to talking to you later this evening, and I've already got your business card, I think, so we'll pass it on.
I got your business card, and for example, we have annually some imported goods exhibition in our industry field. How you can let those information go to the members or companies they need your help, and how we can get some information. For example, maybe you will have some company groups to visit China, so we can know in advance, so we can prepare some introduction. I mean, some meeting with our distributors, members. I mean, those kind of details. Yeah, we sit here to talk more.
Macro level.
Yeah.
So we'd be happy to meet with you afterwards to discuss what your company has to offer and how we can pass it on to Canadian companies. So thank you very much. We'll take that one offline.
We've just got I think 3 minutes, and we are being really strict with the room because this will be used for another event right afterwards. But let's take one last question, if you don't mind. And then I just also like to point out that we have Lois Kong and Xiaozhen in the back of the room there. We're eager, if you're willing, to ask you a few questions about how you're seeing the Chinese market, and if you're willing also to record a few minutes. So I'm being given the time limit, so let's take the last question and then we'll wrap up. No, please. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes. Let's listen.
This one's actually. We see major development actually on the East Coast in terms of lifestyle, culture, sports, and entertainment. Do we start to feel the same thing on Southwest China? Is there all the infrastructure in place, equipment in place for people to practice sports, enjoy entertainment, shows, and performance?
Well, we're definitely seeing the beginning of that, right? If the difference, I guess, in some ways, if you're in Shanghai, right, between here and Suzhou, it's all developed, right? And so there's endless opportunity for that kind of, for folks to want to consume that. If you're in Southwest China, you're going to have these large urban clusters that are surrounded by perhaps more rural areas, right? But if you go to places like Beijing, not only is there an appetite, not only are they starting to catch up in that area, but sometimes there's also more money because the governments are actually trying to play catch up as well. So you can kind of ride that trend to great success if you have something to offer that they're interested in this kind of entertainment area.
All right, thank you everyone for sparing your time this afternoon. Appreciate your presence. And once again, because we're under strict time pressure, we'll wrap up. So thank you everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.